Welcome in, everyone. We are really thrilled to have you with us for another deep dive today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Because as someone who actively follows the evolving tech and financial landscapes, you already know how exhausting the current information ecosystem can be.
Oh, it's relentless.
It really is. We're just constantly bombarded with this relentless stream of hype and catastrophic headline.
And deeply conflicting narratives, too.
Exactly. So sifting through all of that to find actual actionable signal in the noise, I mean, it's a full-time job.
It really is.
And that is exactly our mission today. We are taking a highly debated subject and stripping away the rhetoric to look strictly at the underlying architecture and the hard data.
Which is such a critical exercise, especially right now. When a technology transitions from a fringe experiment to global infrastructure, the volume of misinformation naturally spikes.
Right.
People are trying to process a paradigm shift in real time, which leads to a lot of reactive analysis rather than objective observation.
And that brings us to our core source material for today's deep dive. We are unpacking this really comprehensive document titled The Great Crypto Reality Check: 3 Walls Between You and the Future.
Such a fascinating read.
It really is. And what stands out immediately about this research is how it frames the current climate. It doesn't look at it as a unique crisis, but as a predictable historical pattern.
Yeah, that context is everything.
It points out this fundamental reality that societies invariably panic when confronted with decentralized innovations they just don't understand yet.
The historical parallels they draw are striking.
Yeah.
I mean, if we look back at the rollout of the first universal credit cards.
Oh, back in the mid-20th century.
Exactly. The public reaction was largely absolute distrust.
It sounds crazy to us now.
Right. But the idea of handing a small piece of plastic to a merchant, walking out of a store, and trusting a remote invisible ledger to settle the debt later.
It seemed completely reckless.
Utterly reckless to a population that was so accustomed to hard cash and localized trust.
And we saw the exact same friction with the early internet. The prevailing narrative in the late 90s was that cyberspace was fundamentally insecure.
Or just a passing academic novelty.
Yeah, or exclusively a haven for bad actors. And the document makes a really compelling case that cryptocurrency here in 2026 is navigating that identical evolutionary bottleneck.
Yep.
The skepticism isn't necessarily about the technology itself. It's a structural fear of replacing a familiar legacy system with an unfamiliar, abstracted one.
Which is why the framework of this research is so incredibly useful. The authors don't just wave away the skepticism.
No, they lean into it.
They do. They systematically categorize the public's hesitation into 3 distinct walls, or myths. And our blueprint for today is to examine each of those 3 walls using 2026 market data and current enterprise applications.
So by doing that, we can separate the lingering narratives of the previous decade from the practical, operational realities of the modern financial system.
Exactly.
Let's get right into the first wall. Myth number 1 is all about the criminal element.
Oh, this one is persistent.
Incredibly pervasive. It's this idea that digital assets are, at their core, just high-tech mechanisms for money laundering. We see this constantly in sensationalized media coverage.
It's the whole 2014 Silk Road era stereotype.
Right. It paints crypto as this untraceable digital suitcase full of cash, utilized primarily by hackers, syndicates, and rogue states.
And the cultural staying power of that narrative is fascinating, particularly because it runs entirely counter to the empirical data we have today.
Let's look at that data.
Well, the source document relies on comprehensive forensics from the blockchain analytics firm Chainalysis. When we look at the actual telemetry of the networks, illicit activity currently accounts for less than 1%.
Less than 1%.
Less than 1% of the total cryptocurrency transaction volume globally.
See, that metric alone completely disrupts the mainstream narrative. I do want to push on that a bit, though, for you listening. When we read reports about multi-million-dollar ransomware attacks, those numbers feel massive.
They do.
How does the research reconcile those high-profile, undeniable criminal events with a sub-1% aggregate metric?
It comes down to understanding the denominator, the sheer scale of the global crypto economy today.
Right.
Tens of billions of dollars certainly still flow into illicit addresses. The research doesn't shy away from that raw number at all.
It's still a lot of money.
It is. However, when the broader market processes trillions of dollars in legitimate institutional and retail volume annually, the criminal portion shrinks to a statistical fraction.
Trillions versus billions. That makes sense.
Exactly. But more importantly, the report highlights why that percentage is contracting. And it has everything to do with the foundational architecture of public ledgers.
Okay, let's unpack that architecture. We constantly hear the phrase untraceable, but anyone who understands public blockchains knows that's a complete misnomer.
It's the exact opposite of reality.
Right. Unlike physical fiat cash, which genuinely is an untraceable bearer instrument once it leaves an ATM, a public blockchain is an environment of radical, permanent transparency.
Permanent transparency. Every single movement of capital is time-stamped and immutably recorded.
Which is the irony that the media often misses entirely.
The source specifically points to modern blockchain explorers, like Tronscan, to illustrate this.
Yeah.
These platforms allow anyone, not just specialized investigators, but anyone with an internet connection, to query the ledger. You can observe the precise flow of assets between addresses.
You can map out liquidity pools.
Exactly, and track specific tokens across multiple hops in real time.
Which means if a bad actor attempts to move stolen funds, they are doing so on a permanently public surveillance network. They're essentially broadcasting their capital flows to the entire world.
It's the equivalent of trying to launder money while simultaneously publishing your bank statements on the front page of a major newspaper.
That's a perfect analogy, and that permanent transparency has caused a massive operational shift for global law enforcement, hasn't it?
Massive. Agencies aren't just tolerating digital assets anymore, they are actively leveraging them. Interpol, the FBI, international task forces, they now heavily rely on heuristic clustering and on-chain analytics to dismantle financial crime syndicates.
Wow.
They can track digital assets with a level of forensic precision that is completely impossible within the opaque, fragmented network of traditional offshore shell companies and correspondent banks.
So the takeaway for you here is that the technological reality has outpaced the cultural narrative. The immutable nature of the ledger actually makes cryptocurrency a uniquely hostile environment for large-scale, long-term, illicit activity.
Which fundamentally dismantles that first wall.
Right, and that leads us perfectly into the second wall, keeping people from engaging with this space, the complexity barrier.
Ah, yes. The idea that you have to be a tech genius to use any of this.
Exactly. This is the myth that to participate in the digital asset economy, you still need to be a deeply technical cypherpunk. It's the lingering idea that interacting with crypto requires managing complicated hardware setups.
Guarding convoluted seed phrases.
Yes, and constantly risking total financial ruin just by inputting the wrong hex address.
And to be fair to the skeptics, that was a highly accurate description of the user experience a decade ago. It was incredibly hostile to the average consumer.
Oh, absolutely. But the research data from early 2026 shows a complete decoupling of the underlying complexity from the end-user interface.
The numbers are wild.
They really are. Current estimates place global cryptocurrency ownership at over 560 million people.
To put the magnitude of that number into perspective for you, a user base of 560 million is significantly larger than the entire population of the European Union.
More people than the entire EU.
You do not achieve that level of planetary scale if your technology still demands an advanced understanding of asymmetric cryptography just to execute a basic transfer.
It is a phenomenal benchmark. And the catalyst for that hyper-adoption, according to the document, is the massive evolution in UX, or user experience. The industry has finally solved the abstraction layer.
They've completely hidden the intimidating mechanics of the blockchain.
Right. The user interfaces we see today are functionally indistinguishable from the centralized fintech and banking apps that people already use every day.
The report highlights a very specific practical example of this abstraction layer in action. A service called Trustee Plus.
Let's walk through that application because it really illustrates the shift perfectly.
Yeah, looking at how a platform like Trustee Plus operates gives us a clear window into how the complexity barrier has just been completely dismantled.
So if a user today wants to utilize their digital assets for daily commerce, they don't have to navigate a decentralized exchange.
Or calculate network gas fees.
Exactly. With a platform like this, they simply open an app, authenticate their identity, and instantly issue themselves a virtual payment card.
And the critical bridge here is interoperability with existing payment rails.
Yes.
Once that virtual card is issued, the user immediately binds it to their Apple Pay or Google Pay wallet.
Which means the actual point-of-sale experience is entirely normalized. A user can walk into a local grocery store, tap their smartphone to a standard terminal to buy a coffee, and the transaction settles instantly.
The merchant receives their local fiat currency, and the user's digital asset balance is seamlessly debited in the background.
What's really fascinating here is the sheer amount of invisible engineering making that simple tap possible.
Right. In the milliseconds between the user tapping their phone and the terminal approving the purchase, incredibly complex decentralized networks are routing the transaction,
Smart contracts are managing the liquidity and conversion rates.
and cryptography is securing the settlement. Yet, the consumer experiences none of that friction.
It is the exact same dynamic we see with the modern internet. When you send a secure email, you aren't manually configuring TCP/IP protocols.
Or worrying about SSL handshakes.
Exactly. You type your message and hit send. The complexity of the network architecture is entirely abstracted away. Crypto has finally reached that identical stage of invisible utility.
The barrier to entry hasn't just been lowered. For the average consumer, it has been entirely erased.
And when the underlying technology disappears into the background and users are only interacting with the utility it provides, that is the definitive marker of a mature, permanent infrastructure.
Definitely.
Which brings us to the third and most formidable wall the source tackles, the speculative bubble myth.
The loud contingent.
Very loud. Even if people accept that the technology is secure from criminals and easy for everyday consumers to use, there is still this narrative arguing that the entire ecosystem lacks intrinsic value.
The idea that digital assets are just a modern tulip mania.
A giant precarious casino driven purely by speculative trading with no real-world application.
It is a common critique, but evaluating the intrinsic value of a decentralized network requires looking at two distinct pillars: the scale of its integration into legacy capital markets and its operational utility in solving tangible, real-world inefficiencies.
Let's tackle the capital markets pillar first, because the 2026 data provided in the source completely shatters the idea that this is just a retail-driven casino.
The institutional adoption is unprecedented.
It really is. The report specifically highlights the BlackRock iShares Bitcoin Trust, or IBIT. We are talking about the world's largest, most risk-averse asset managers integrating this technology into their core offerings. IBIT alone manages tens of billions of dollars in assets.
And if we zoom out across all spot Bitcoin ETFs trading globally, institutional custodians now collectively hold nearly 1 million Bitcoins.
1 million Bitcoin.
That is a staggering concentration of sovereign and institutional wealth. This level of capital inflow creates a global market capitalization that persistently sits in the trillions of dollars.
Trillions.
When pension funds, sovereign wealth portfolios, and massive institutional asset managers allocate capital at this scale, we are no longer discussing a fringe speculative experiment.
We are looking at deep, systemic integration into the foundation of global finance.
Exactly.
That institutional validation provides a massive floor of legitimacy. But I want to pivot to the second pillar, because this is where the conversation gets incredibly compelling. Beyond acting as a store of value or an institutional portfolio diversifier, what is the actual mechanical utility of the technology?
Right. Why are enterprises across various sectors adopting the underlying blockchain architecture?
Exactly.
To understand the enterprise value, we have to look past simple asset transfers and focus on smart contracts. While the concept of smart contracts has been discussed theoretically for years, the 2026 source document highlights how they are now actively deployed to eliminate massive operational bottlenecks.
Instead of rehashing basic definitions, let's look at how these self-executing protocols are actually bypassing legacy systems today. The report outlines 3 massive global industries where this is happening right now.
Starting with global logistics and supply chain management.
The traditional global supply chain is notoriously bogged down by fragmented trust.
You have manufacturers, shipping conglomerates, customs agencies, and local distributors, all operating on siloed, incompatible databases.
Reconciling payments across these borders usually involves a labyrinth of letters of credit, correspondent banks, and 30 to 60-day net payment windows.
It is an incredibly capital inefficient system. But the document shows how enterprises are overlaying smart contracts onto this process. They are utilizing IoT, or Internet of Things, sensors on shipping containers that feed real-time GPS and temperature data directly into a blockchain protocol.
This completely changes the settlement timeline.
Completely.
The exact second a shipping container arrives at a specific geofenced port, the smart contract automatically registers the delivery conditions and instantly releases the escrowed funds to the supplier.
There are no manual invoices to process.
No banking delays.
And no multi-party disputes over arrival times. It condenses a 30-day administrative headache into an instant cryptographically guaranteed settlement.
The reduction in overhead and counterparty risk is just massive. And we are seeing a similar decentralization of legacy systems in the energy sector, too. The report details how smart contracts are fundamentally altering the power grid.
Specifically regarding localized solar energy. Historically, the energy grid has been a strict centralized monopoly.
Right.
If a homeowner's solar panels generate excess electricity, their only option has been to sell that power back to the centralized regional utility company, usually at a highly depressed wholesale rate dictated by the utility itself.
But the architecture of blockchain allows for the creation of decentralized microgrids. The document explores active pilot programs where households are entirely bypassing the traditional utility companies.
Using smart contracts, a homeowner can automatically route and sell their excess solar power directly to a neighbor down the street on a peer-to-peer basis.
The smart contract manages the metering, calculates the real-time localized market rate, and instantly settles the transaction in digital assets.
This doesn't just provide a better financial return for the individual. It inherently makes the broader energy grid more resilient by decentralizing the distribution and settlement of power.
It forces a completely new competitive dynamic onto legacy utility monopolies. And finally, the research points to the healthcare sector.
This is arguably the most complex environment for data management.
Because you are constantly battling the tension between absolute security and the need for rapid interoperability between specialists, hospitals, and insurance providers.
The current centralized models for electronic health records are highly vulnerable to catastrophic breaches, which we see constantly, and they are terribly inefficient when a patient moves between different hospital networks.
The blockchain application here isn't about putting raw, sensitive medical images on a public ledger. It is about cryptographic access control. A patient's data can be encrypted and fragmented across a secure network. The patient then holds the private keys, essentially a digital signature, allowing them to grant a specific surgeon or a specific clinic temporary verifiable access to their records via a smart contract.
It shifts the ownership of the data away from the centralized hospital server and back to the individual. When you aggregate these use cases, automating global supply chains, decentralizing localized energy grids, and securing interoperable healthcare data, the intrinsic value of the technology becomes undeniable.
It really does.
It is a foundational infrastructure designed to strip away the costly, rent-seeking intermediaries that currently sit in the middle of almost every global transaction.
That synthesis really encapsulates the entire reality check presented in the source document. By dismantling these three walls, we see a remarkably clear picture of the current landscape. The technology has decisively migrated out of the ideological, highly technical echo chambers of the 2010s.
It is no longer a theoretical playground for developers or a shadowy network for illicit actors.
It has crossed the chasm. The data clearly demonstrates that digital assets and blockchain architecture have become deeply integrated, practical tools.
They're being adopted globally, not because of ideological fervor, but because they offer tangible, measurable improvements in speed, security, and efficiency over legacy systems.
And for you listening to this, having a firm grasp on this reality provides a massive analytical edge. While the broader public might still be reacting to outdated headlines about untraceable criminal networks or highly complex seed phrases, you understand the actual telemetry.
You know that illicit volume is a statistical anomaly.
You understand that the user experience has been entirely streamlined through platforms like Trustee Plus and Apple Pay.
And most importantly, you see how trillions of dollars in institutional capital and smart contract utility are completely rewiring everything from logistics to energy grids.
Understanding the mechanics behind this shift allows you to view the financial future not as an abstract concept, but as an actively deploying infrastructure. The global economy is rapidly becoming entirely digital, cryptographically transparent, and peer-to-peer.
The noise will certainly continue, but the structural foundation has already been poured.
That is the exact clarity we always aim to extract from these documents. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with one final complex thought.
Yeah, something to analyze as you consider the broader implications of everything we've discussed today regarding the permanent nature of public ledgers.
The transition to this infrastructure certainly introduces entirely new societal dynamics to navigate.
Definitely.
If the integration of blockchain technology is fundamentally driving our global systems toward a state of radical, unalterable transparency,
Where everything from the origin of our energy usage to the real-time flow of our financial settlements is permanently etched into public protocols.
exactly. How will our society eventually reconcile that systemic transparency with the deeply ingrained fundamental human expectation of personal privacy?
It is arguably the most critical philosophical and architectural challenge engineers and regulators will face in the coming decade.
A massive puzzle to ponder as you go about your day. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to join us for this deep dive. Sifting through the noise is never easy, but it is always worth the effort. Keep questioning the consensus, keep examining the underlying data, and keep expanding your perspective. We look forward to having you with us on the next one.